The first group up is Planetamic. This one is very near and dear to my heart because it is based on one of my very favorite board games, but brought to the web so that you can play across long distances with your friends and family. And the board game itself is all about working together to defeat disease. And so you either can eradicate the disease or everyone loses. And so it's really an all or nothing sort of thing. And there's a lot of wonderful and complex game logic that goes into this. So I'll let them take it away and tell you more about it.
Hey, my name is Mary Yen. This is An Lei, and this is Emily Eastlick. And we're the team behind Planetamic, a web app version of the popular board game Pandemic. In Pandemic, up to 4 players will work together to cure diseases that are spread out across the world. Pandemic is a great fit for a web application because of its complex game state. From infection levels of each city to travel routes, there's just a lot going on in this game. So, in the game, players can travel to a city and treat it to bring its infection level down. There are also city cards, which can be used to make direct flights to cities or build research stations and or cure diseases. Now let's take a look at the technologies that we use to build this web application. On the front end, we use React. We also styled them using a Semantic UI. And for the map display, we use the Leaflet.js. On the back end, we have Firebase storing our game state. Firebase will also sync the app across multiple clients. This means that all players will have access to the same game state at all times. We also eliminated the intermediary of a Redux store to prevent redundancy. This also will hide our game state from players, which will prevent players from cheating. And now An will discuss the difficulties that this design decision posed.
Thanks, Mary. Choosing not to use the Redux store meant that the traditional paradigm of dispatching actions from the front end was no longer optimal. Instead, most of our game logic was built using Firebase Cloud Functions. Cloud Functions are triggered at a specified database location when an event occurs. We initiate our back-end logic with triggers built into the flow of the game. For example, when a player's turn ends, we deal new cards, handle epidemics, infect new cities before the turn changes. But many important actions happen outside of this flow, and we need a way to pause this sequence. This is a trivial step when you play the game in person, but much harder to simulate in a web app. We solve this by building an additional data in the game state that can only be modified from the front end with trigger for the remaining Firebase functions to run. For example, when a player's turn ends and she has more than 7 cards on her hand, we need to wait for her to discard the extra cards before allowing the backend logic to continue. And now Emily will talk more about our backend logic.
Thanks, An. Like Mary mentioned, Pandemic is well suited to a web application because its complex game logic is easily misinterpretable, even to experienced players of the game. One example of this is chain reactions caused by outbreaks. When a city's infection level would increase above 3, then the infection spreads to adjacent cities and chain reactions can occur. We handled this by storing the initial outbreak site in a queue. Then we go through each of that city's connections, which are stored in an adjacency list. If a city is safe from an outbreak, then it gets handled immediately. Otherwise, it gets added to the queue so that we can handle its connections later. One of the most important steps in this process is guaranteeing that outbreaks don't backpropagate, because a city can only serve as an outbreak site once per turn. We handle this by storing cities that have already had outbreaks in a set. Let's look at an example. This board configuration seems fairly innocuous, but because of the game logic I mentioned earlier, when this player fails to remove an infection from Baghdad before the end of her turn, the results are disastrous. Designing these scenarios was one of our favorite parts of building this game, and we hope you have half as much fun falling into these traps as we did making them. Thank you.
That was very well done, and I'm really looking forward to this pun developing when this game goes viral. It hasn't happened yet.
We did there. I think it's cool when they were talking about the issues with the the spread of the virus. How it's like I mean, clearly the pandemic people planned it, but it's like a graph problem that they're trying to, and it's hard to emulate, in your brain on the board. So it's cool that they to see their solution for it, and it looks great too.
It's great to see all of the whiteboards across the entire campus covered in graphs.
Covered in graphs of
of diseases, yeah.
We're not doing anything illegal here.